So my name's Stefan Kaufman. I'm chairing the MSCI seminar this morning. I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, as well as the Bunurong, and their connection to this land that was never ceded. I feel like their pragmatic wisdom is seen a thriving civilization here for 40,000 plus years is something we have a lot to learn from. And really, it's Dror's pragmatic wisdom that I wanted to share today. So I feel a bit of a connection there, but you see if you see it in the talk. And you've all had a chance to read Dror's bio, so I won't dwell too much on that, except to say that he's done some amazing work with small business and entrepreneurship, a lot of it in North America, but globally as well. And I came across his work in the context of wanting to understand how entrepreneurs who wanted to offer goods and services that are a little bit at the fringe of the normal, towards more unthinkable lifestyle changes for sustainability. And I really valued Dror's ability, I guess, to connect deep ideas from theory and research to what's actually going to have cut through and be relevant to people who have real problems and real businesses to run and so on. And I'm particularly excited to hear about his research he's sharing today, because I think it will be very valuable for those of us who work with climate change and business in general, but also in that broader question of how do we make these sometimes distant and perhaps feeling abstract, although increasingly less these days, challenges relevant to people. And yeah, it's going to be great. I won't say a lot more than that, but welcome, Dror. It's wonderful to have you here, and I'll hand over to you.
All right, thank you. That was such a gracious and very nice introduction. I appreciate it. I think you captured it very well. I like theoretical questions, but I also am especially attracted to things that we could do, because I think there's a lot of work to be done, and kind of at that intersection of something that kind of we understand the theory and the empirics, but also that it could be applied practically in the real world is something that interests me. So I'll be talking about that today. I'll start showing my slides, I guess, as one does. Let's see. And hopefully you see a screen with some text on it right now, Stefan?
Yep, I'm loving the subtitle.
Yeah, so it will be a serious academic talk, and this is just to kind of capture people's attention. It won't be nearly as titillating as you think this might be with this text, but all of these things will actually come up in the talk. So you keep your eyes open and ears open, and you might actually notice. But yeah, the real emphasis is here on small businesses and climate action. And I think a way to introduce it that I think has been working for me is through just a very simple thought experiment in terms of how small businesses can be engaged in climate issues. So I like to frequent like the local shops and the small businesses. And here's an example. I had to frame something a few months ago, and looked around at my neighborhood who does framing, and I found this. I think these are the two co-owners. That's the name of the company. It's in Montreal, where I live, and I've been there a couple times by now, different projects. And these are like good people. These are people who I think would want to do something about climate change. These are people who seem to be kind of aware that this exists. Just very brief conversations with them about things that matter to them. I would imagine that it's within their ideological worldview to do something about this. And then at the same time, I think they don't really have a clear idea or a clear priority or a clear emphasis on this topic. They're kind of in the business of doing frames. They want to stay profitable. They have a lot of things to do. If you're a small business owner, you have so many things that you need to juggle. You're basically doing a little bit of everything, of operations and marketing and strategy and customer service. And it's like, who has time to actually do anything around climate? So my question is, what will make people like this, or what will make this specific company take climate action at their business? And this is much more fun to do in the real world without Zoom and this kind of interface. But if somebody has some thoughts, if somebody's like, well, what would be, and throw anything out there that you think could be an effective way to make or encourage these owners to take climate action. Does anybody have any thoughts?
I'll do a Dorothy Dixer. Tell them more about climate change.
Give them more information.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay. And just generally, like the polar bears are miserable, and the ice is melting, and
Yeah.
floods are
I think
happening.
as emotive as possible. Yeah.
As emotive as possible. Okay,
Yeah.
other thoughts? Oh, it's in the chat. Good. Let's see what people are saying in the chat. To sustainably source. So that's like a specific kind of operational idea. It's like, change your practices in terms of sourcing. All right. Ask them to do some research, perhaps, and identify tax incentives, grasp potential profits. Paris is probably an economist or a policy person. That seems like that might be coming from that direction. And Melissa is kind of more in my domain, goods, leverage social norms. That's going to be actually the big emphasis of this talk. So I already like Melissa. I don't know who you are. And Rob is also pointing us to a social psychology. Point them to what others are doing. I think you meant to write others. And good marketing. All right, you guys are good for non-business folks. I heard you're from the Sustainability Institute, but you seem to have very solid business sensibilities. Workers network too. All right, cool, good. So let's explore a little bit of these. It kind of then I'll gradually channel our focus to things that I've been working on. Okay, so first, actually, to say that this is not a small problem. I mean, this is like a big chunk of the economy. When I say SMEs, people don't always have a sense of how big and how many and how diverse and which industries and so on and so forth. These are some that I've listed. Obviously, there's bigger players in many of these, but these are, I think, some domains in which SMEs are quite dominant and we see them all around. And depending on, there hasn't been a lot of math in terms of how much carbon emissions we could associate to small businesses as opposed to large businesses. It's not easy to do. And the numbers are anywhere from 20 to 40% of the economy, roughly. It also depends on what you call a small business. How big is small? Is it up to 50, up to 250, up to 500? So there's not very solid numbers, but we do know that more than 50% of jobs are in small businesses. We do know that the number of companies that are small as opposed to the companies that are large is well over 90%. So if we look around, we see a lot of small businesses. And all this to just say is that we shouldn't kind of say, oh, they're small businesses, therefore they're unimportant and their emissions are small. So individually, probably each and every one of these doesn't release a lot of carbon or other types of greenhouse gases. But on aggregate, if we take all of the small businesses, the numbers do add up to quite a substantial thing. So this is not a trivial or small sector of the economy. And I think, the two that would probably kind of be the ones that would come to mind quite quickly are really policy. So we saw a few, or at least one or two of those ideas. How do we change the policy? So for example, around carbon pricing, incentives, taxes. I think a lot of policies around economics. And another would be, would there be some technologies that would be applicable? But often the types of technologies that we're seeing developing and becoming large scale are not necessarily something that are directly useful for small businesses. They could be useful for the entire, anybody who consumes energy, for example. So they're not necessarily very tailored to the needs of small businesses or suitable for them more than any other actors in the economy. So, these are there in the background, but I would call them rather blunt and not necessarily super suitable for small businesses. This was Stefan's idea. This is called the information deficit model. And I'm imagining that people have heard this view, or this is kind of, just explain things better to people, explain things more to people, give people knowledge and they will act. So this is like a very rational view of humans, and therefore not at all suitable because we know how irrational many of our behaviors are. And so as you can see here, it kind of oversimplifies how people make sense of, evaluate, synthesize, and especially use information. Because I think many people now know that this is a problem, but they don't really know what to do with that information, or how to make that information something that will motivate and change their behaviors. That's really the challenge. So the information deficit model in terms of changing behavior doesn't seem to be doing enough of the lifting. And then the last one is kind of, and I think Stefan has dabbled in this, and perhaps others, is the behavioral model, behavioral economics, the nudge, different names for that. and basically give people choices. This is often called paternalistic libertarianism. Give people choices, but help them to make the choices that you think, as the architect, that you think are the right choices to make. And the classic example is, don't make a big issue about printing on paper on both sides, but make it so that the printer is set up in such a way that the default printing mode is double-sided. And of course, people can opt out back into single-sided printing if they want, but the double-sided print is the default. And in that way, it's actually goes way below people's radar. They don't turn it into a fuss. They don't make an issue out of it. And they kind of make the right choice by default because they're lazy and they have other things to think about. It is very appealing, but I still have not seen, and this was a recent review paper, I still have not seen that this can make like really big impacts, right? It works. The examples are cool, nifty, amusing sometimes, but in terms of like, so yeah, printing paper, you could fix it perhaps. Maybe you could change some food choices, but beyond that, it doesn't seem to have a lot of like large scale impacts. So I don't think it's going to be enough in and of itself. So given that, these four kind of, each of them isn't necessarily powerful enough to create what change. The one that interests me and the name that I've heard being used recently by Elke Weber, a psychologist at Princeton, who works on sustainability stuff, is motivational deficits. All right, not knowledge deficits, but motivational deficits. We're missing the people who can act are missing some kind of motivation or some kind of impetus and prioritization to really do this more substantially in their lives. And the pathways to maybe increasing motivation or reducing these deficits might be a few, and I'll go through just two of them very quickly as background to what we're doing in my research. So, and I think this is kind of a bit what Rob was proposing. We are social animals. And here's some examples, whether you recycle, right? Recycling or composting, I think in most places, I don't know, in Australia, is a voluntary act. And you do it just because when you see your neighbors doing it, you feel that that is the right thing to do, right? Because you drive down the street, you see all the other people have their compost bins outside waiting for pickup once a week. So you know that that is the right thing to do. That is the socially acceptable thing. But we see this in driving behavior. We see this in many things. Another good example is that when you go, if you want to freak people out, when you next time go into an elevator, do not turn around to face the front, but just stay facing the back. And you'll see that people are very, very perplexed at your behavior, right? So we've all been accustomed to this idea that when we're in an elevator, we face the door rather than facing the back. So we look for cues from social reference and basically from people like us. And so that's the point that I want to emphasize here is that small businesses, the reference would not necessarily be academics or not necessarily be other types of influencers that are kind of detached, but mainly they would be interested in hearing or understanding what other small businesses are doing. So that's the one thing, that's social proof and peer-to-peer influence. And then the other is I just want to talk a little bit about how we get ideas in terms of how we want to act. And I want to talk about contagion. If anybody has kids, you might remember the fidget spinner craze of about 5 or 6 years ago. And it was actually analyzed. I think this was The Economist. I can't remember. No, this is Google Trends. And it was everywhere for about 2 or 3 months. And then it disappeared just as fast as it came up, right? And so this is called simple contagion. And you could think about all kinds of things that have this very simple thing. Suddenly they're everywhere, and then suddenly they disappear just as fast. A lot of music is like that. All kinds of cultural phenomena have this simple contagion model. And basically, the reason that I want to emphasize it, it has no staying power. And actually, what we do not want when we try to push for sustainability, we want contagion to be actually cumulative and maybe not necessarily as fast, but we don't want it to disappear. And so some scholars, and I think the key person here is Damon Centella, he's called this complex contagion. And again, I'm probably telling you stuff that you know in neighborhoods, for example, or if you want to see how solar power expands and scales up. Typically, we see that it's geographic proximity. Some early adopters do it in a certain neighborhood, and then other people drive by, they see it, they might talk to their neighbors. learn a little bit about more social, about solar, learn from their friends, maybe do some math eventually, then hear about a deal. It's just kind of gradual accretion of information and norms around the possibility, and then they eventually take the leap and do that as well. So this is a great paper from Nature Energy, talking about complex contagion in energy behavior. And it says basically for these kind of deeper, more fundamental things that cost more, that their payback is not as clear, that the risk is a bit higher, that are maybe not in our domain of expertise, we need a lot of exposure to ideas, to different types of information, to different types of people before we actually make these types of changes. And so I believe that kind of the pathway to making small businesses and other kind of entities take these concrete steps to do something does involve complex contagion, repeated exposure from different sources at different levels of information. So those are kind of the bedrocks of this, for me at least, the social proof, the social norm view of trying to get people to behave in a more sustainable way. Maybe I'll pause here for, to be honest, a quick drink of water, but if there's a question.
I have a question, Dror, to give you some more time for having a sip of your water, if you like. But maybe you're going to talk about this more. But I was just reading a news article yesterday that's going to be a ban on personal fireworks in the Netherlands, which is way overdue because of all the accidents that are happening every year. But in the article, there was also reference to a percentage of peers that need to be doing the right behavior in order for it to be, become the dominant, like a tipping point, if you like. Do you have any?
Yes.
I think that was around 22 or 25% or something. Is that the type of numbers we are thinking about when it comes to tipping points and peer behavior?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I remember reading, and I think this was in political science domain. Probably other people have remembered this. This was around how many people you need to start to mobilize for political things. If you want to kind of overthrow an autocratic government, if you want to change like a regressive regime, how many people need to start showing up in the town squares and in the city? And I think the number was surprisingly low. If I remember, it was 3%. And it could be, but I might be wrong, that the author of that work was Theda Skocpol. I don't know exactly how to pronounce her name, but that's one number that I remember from the politics domain. And really, if somebody knows this better than I do, put it in the chat. I think, though, I think as whatever those numbers might be, it is kind of for a bit of a yes/no kind of thing. Yes fireworks or no fireworks, or yes regime or no regime. And I think a lot of sustainability behaviors are a bit more of a gradation and a kind of a set of activities. And so, you could imagine people who might have an electric car, but still have a gas stove. And so, there's like I think there's a frontier of different types of activities at different levels of intensity. And it wouldn't be as easy to assign that one specific number because people kind of go at different paces with different technologies and different choices. And it wouldn't be like because this kind of idea of a tipping point is like for a certain one type of behavior, I think. And it might not be always applicable to these types of things that we're talking about here. Cool. All right. So let me tell you about how I got into the research that I'm going to kind of talk a bit more about. I was, before I worked at the University of Vermont, before I moved here 2 years ago, I worked at a university in Canada called McGill. And we did a pretty big project actually with a National Film Board of Canada, and it was called Pivot. And it was around small and medium businesses. I don't know if people are familiar with the National Film Board of Canada. So anyway, that was one of our partners. Then we had several dozen, eventually several hundred small and medium businesses from across Canada, and a few organizations, not-for-profit organizations, who are promoting small businesses and climate action. So that was kind of the way the work was organized, and we were kind of the research group. And the National Film Board of Canada, just very briefly background, was the Office of Propaganda, literally, in World War II. Their job was to convince Canadians that it was worth life and blood and gold to fight oppression in Europe. And eventually, the war ended, and well, but what do we do with this group of people now? And they turned it into a quasi. It's essentially a governmental agency whose job is the way they think about it is to hold up a mirror to Canadian society, less in terms of day-to-day news events, but more in terms of deeper issues: poverty, Indigenous rights, inequality, and climate change, of course, over the last few years. And they're very good at it. They're basically a studio. They produce all kinds of movies, short, long movies. They get Oscars. They develop technologies. They cultivate directors. It's really a remarkable Canadian institution, of which I and many other Canadians are quite proud. And then about 15 years ago, they realized that film was dying, or at least partially dying, and they realized they needed to do something in the digital space. And they kind of developed a digital studio, and we got to work with those folks. The digital studio kind of does all kinds of stuff on the internet with the same idea, but kind of with a broader set of tools, not just film. And they wanted to do something about climate. And the backstory for our first study with these folks was that we were thinking about what would be the way to present this issue of climate and small businesses. And they were of the belief that we basically need to present a business case in an interesting way, an artistic way, but basically the only thing that would matter for business people would be to understand that it would benefit their bottom line. And I kept pushing back against that. I was like, I thought that's too simplistic. That was just my intuition, that it was a bit too simplistic. And that's not necessarily the way that people pursue something that is meaningful. And they kept pushing back at me, and they were just having these standoffs. And eventually I kind of had this brilliant idea. It's like, well, why don't we turn that into a research question? It's like, if we can't agree on this, even very, very basic premise, let's try to explore it as a kind of a rigorous research study. And so what we did, what you can see here, is we created a study, and you've probably seen these types of studies. You do it on a social media platform. In our case, this was Facebook. And you take a certain idea, and you do basically a randomized controlled trial. So we took this woman who runs a small business, a real estate company in Montreal that has a big focus on sustainability. And we created 3 different messages that are actually quite authentic, because she did say these 3 different things about what compels her to engage in sustainability. It's hard to see the exact tasks, but you can see that they're very similar in terms of their appearance, in terms of their length, in terms of the image. Everything is exactly the same. The only difference is what is the text inside. So we control for everything. That's kind of what I'm trying to lead to. And 1/3 of the people who were exposed to this campaign got the monetary narrative. Basically, I'm doing sustainability because it increases my financials, it improves my financials, I make money. The other 1/3 of people got the pro-social narrative. I'm doing this because I care for my environment, or for my grandkids, or for my community, or for Canada, or something in that vein, or some combination thereof. So we call all of those types of motivations pro-social. And then the 3rd one is because, and quite a few people said this when we talked to small businesses in preparing this study, is like it makes their work more interesting. They have this challenge. They believe it can be done. They think sustainability and business are not antithetical. And it appeals to them to try to crack this nut of being a business that's also good for society. And so that's, they would say, I have a challenge. I want to show people. I have this ambition. I have this drive. They would use this type of language. And so we sent this out, and basically then we measured which of these resonated more for people in terms of, were they likely to click on one to read more about it? Were they likely to, pursue any kind of action after being exposed to this image, or impression is the way they call it on these channels. And then, it's very basic to just count and see which one is more meaningful. And here's the results that we got. So 95,000 people almost got this. Of those, only a small portion, as you know, on Facebook actually click on something. But the key takeaway here is that the non-monetary narratives, so the other 2, the pro-social and the achievement narratives, were 50% more effective in engaging people in terms of, well, hey, I want to learn more about this. I want to understand this a bit better. I want to follow this thread a bit more closely. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that they eventually did anything, and we can't do that with that type of study. But it did kind of create this opening for us to say, well, people are interested in this topic, not just for, or even actually less, by trying to get a sense of the business case for it, but like they try to understand what are the motivations that make people do these types of things. So that's kind of how I got into it. As we did that, though, I was starting to read up other types of literature. Sorry, it just got published, doesn't matter. and it basically, yeah. So I think this is the way that we often think about business and sustainability, right? We kind of assume that people want to make money or maximize their profitability. And then we say, well, if that's your thing, should you pursue sustainability? And I think that's kind of, if we prove to them that it's monetarily beneficial, then they will do it. But I think that's really the wrong way to think about the question. Here's the way that I think is the better way to, given that I appreciate challenges or desire accomplishments or care about my kids or one of these things, how can I pursue sustainability in my business and stay in business, right? So I think, to me, if you talk to a typical business person, this is a more, I think, realistic in terms of how they are built, how their mental models work. And I think very few people are convinced by the first one. They'll often kind of wave you, well, maybe that company or maybe that type of person, but not me. But I think the second line is something that's much more appealing for the vast majority of people, even people who might not, be environmentalists. Okay, so as I was, sorry, this is the point I wanted. As I was doing this, I started to think about something called belief traps. There are people. Is anybody familiar with the notion of a belief trap? Okay, so all right, here's the bit about alcoholism. About 30 years ago, some folks at Stanford started to think about college drinking behavior. And I don't know if you have this image. If you're older, you might have seen movies like Animal House. And there's a lot of movies about college life in the United States, which involves essentially a lot of partying, a lot of alcohol consumption. This lifestyle of the undergraduate student on the American campus is kind of raunchy and debauched. And it turns out that that's actually been quite a cultural touchstone for students. And they come in basically thinking that that's the college experience, and that is the correct and socially appropriate college experience, is to come to college and then spend a lot of your time drinking and at parties. But when you ask them, is that how you actually want to spend your time? If you ask them like in private and you say, relieve them of what is the right answer, they say, no, actually, I don't want to drink that much. The thing is, though, that they think that in order to be socially acceptable, they have to adopt that behavior. But many of them individually think that that behavior does not suit them. So they have a first order belief, is what we call it, a first order belief that they don't want to drink a lot. But they have a second order belief, or a belief about what other people believe, right? So that's a second order belief. What I believe that other people believe. And their second order belief is that people want to drink a lot. And there's a mismatch between their first order beliefs, what I want, and their second order beliefs. But their second order beliefs are inaccurate because we can poll everybody about their first order beliefs and recognize that people actually don't want to drink. But somehow, because of this very odd dynamic, the second order belief persists because they don't really ask people, they don't get honest answers, and they don't have a way to update that information to be more accurate and to eliminate the belief trap between the first order belief and the second order belief. Is that clear? That's a bit of a complicated kind of topic, but it's this distinction between what I believe and what I believe that others believe, and those are not aligned. And then if you think about it even a bit more, you realize that because we have this misguided beliefs, we behave in the way that we think others want us to behave, and we continue to perpetuate the belief trap because we start to drink more than we think is right in order to be cool. And then other people look at us and they say, oh, right, everybody's drinking here. And so it's very hard to escape the belief trap because it informs our choices subsequently. And it's kind of a tricky but also interesting social psychological problem. If there is a belief trap, how do we actually stop it and correct people's belief to be more accurate? And so this is it's been proven quite a lot in the case of college drinking. Another example that's been studied a lot and seems to be quite true is genital mutilation, especially for young or baby girls in Africa. If you ask mothers if they want it, they say no. But then you ask them, well, why do you do this? Like, everybody else wants us to do it. But you ask everybody else, they also say no. And it's very strange. It kind of persists, even though actually each and every individual mother thinks that it's wrong. There's studies that say that this is also an issue in gun control. I don't want a gun, but everybody else wants a gun, so on and so forth. So it's quite common. I said, well, let's see if this is happening in the case of climate action in small businesses, right? You could say, well, hey, I want to do it, but everybody else doesn't want to do it. I don't see anybody else taking action. And therefore, it seems to me that the social norm is not to do anything about climate action among my referent group of small businesses. I want to do it. Nobody else wants to do it. There's a belief trap. And so that's kind of really the research question. So back in that project of Pivot that I was telling you about, I kind of got a first take at this question because we did this little survey. And we asked people, the first question is, what is your first order belief, right? Which of the following things motivate you to pursue climate action? And then we wanted to get at what is their second order belief, because we asked them, hey, how would you like us to present your climate action to somebody else? And we wanted to see if the reason that they are doing it is the same as the reason that they think others want to hear. So does everybody see that these are kind of asking, well, what do you want? But what do you think other people want to hear? And so that's kind of assessing whether they, without mentioning the word belief trap to them or kind of skewing their views, we were trying to get at whether there's a difference between what's motivating them and what they think is motivating other people. We did that study with a pretty small sample, and we were wrong. So I was wrong. I had to admit it to everybody. It turned out that in this cohort, there was actually no belief trap. They were doing it for mainly environmental reasons. That's the top 3 answers here. To question number 12, and then, but when we asked them, well, should we present your work to others? In what way should we do that? They said, no, present it from the environmental perspective. So their first order beliefs and their second order beliefs were actually aligned. There was no belief trap for this cohort of very proactive, climate-oriented small businesses. So I kind of put it in the drawer. Some time elapsed, and I met a few other people who were interested in the same question and were much smarter than me. Oh, well, I'm skipping ahead. And basically, the project got resurrected, and we thought about a different way of doing it, which I'll tell you in just a moment. I want to preface it, and I have about 5 or 10 more minutes. I hope I'm not boring you too much. And then we'll take Q&A and discussion. But I want to preface it. This is the part about the fraud and the dishonesty that I promised in the opening slide. Have people followed the Francesca Gino story in Harvard? This is a Harvard Business School professor, tenured Harvard Business School professor who was fired because there was clear evidence. There was like a big, lengthy report about, and it's funny because she studies fraud, but it turns out that she actually committed it. So that was also kind of intriguing. So she studies dishonesty. How dishonest might you want to be to get away with stuff? And we see this a lot. A lot of entrepreneurs kind of make these pretty wild claims about what their product does or what their product could do. And she was interested in testing what are the boundaries of that type of thing. And her research was, well published and well cited. Turns out it was entirely fraudulent, literally making up data in some cases, manipulating in ways that are clearly egregiously inappropriate. Fascinating story in New York Times, New Yorker covered it, and so on and so forth. And this had been kind of an issue that I think has been recognized in the background of a lot of social psychology research for many years. Some of the things were never replicable. If you've heard of the story of the power pose, does anybody know what the power pose is? This is the idea that if you stand in a certain way with your arms crossed and your legs, exactly, Stefan's doing a demo. If you project that, then your words are considered more seriously and so on and so forth. And nobody was able to replicate that. And there's quite a few things that have not been replicable and are quite dubious, actually, when you think about them. And so some social psychologists started to take this quite seriously. And this is something that I want to introduce here as kind of a byproduct of my path to this research. How can we be more honest in our research? Because the reason that people do this is because if you have non-findings, they're very hard to publish, right? You might have a wonderful hypothesis. It might be very compelling from the theory, and then you do it and you get, oh, actually there's no effect. And very few journals are interested in publishing that, as compelling as the theorization is. And that's funny because everybody might be doing the same thing. We're discovering there's non-effects. It might be very wasteful. Everybody's wasting their time barking up this tree. And rather than, designing a good study and saying, hey, actually, this is not a thing. Let's move on to do something else. This all gets shoved in the drawer and is never becoming public. And so the social psychologists have kind of devised this method called the registered report. Has anybody heard about registered reports yet? Stefan has. All right. And I keep saying, oh, Stefan, because I only see 5 people in this little window. So if other people are raising their hands and waving at me, I'm sorry if I don't see you. Registered reports. So registered reports is a peer review before the results are known to align scientific values and practices. And the idea is you're a researcher, you think about a thing and you design a study and you do everything correctly and you just want to actually know the answer truly And you don't want to kind of, p-hack. You don't want to put yourself in a position where you are very tempted to maybe modify things a little bit, maybe collect a bit more data, maybe subtly change the hypothesis. You actually want to do good research and then discover whether your hunch is right or wrong with a carefully designed, well-analyzed study. And so the way that this is done is you actually do peer review on the theorization of the paper and the study design, okay? So we're doing this actually, and I'll show you the paper that we're actually working on. You write the whole paper except for the results section. You write the abstract, you write the intro, you write the data collection, you write everything, and then you send it to the journal and they review it and critique it. They like it. Does the theory make sense? Is the design good? Are you collecting enough samples? Is whatever? And is the right statistics and so on and so forth. You go back and forth just like a regular review, and then they say, all right, we're going to conditionally accept it. At that point, you go out and you collect the data. And notice what happens, right? You have no motive now to try to sugarcoat it if it doesn't come out well. It's like, you're already got your publication, you're good to go. And so that's what we've done. We've just got 2 weeks ago the conditional accept. So we've passed this, we're exactly at that red arrow. And now we have, I think they gave us 6 months to collect and analyze the data and basically just fill in the results section. And then it should get published unless we just don't do what we said we would do. So I just wanted to spotlight that practice, which I think is, this is great. This is the best scientific advance that I've seen in the last few years, that the scientific community, at least some of us, have banded together and tried to make this a thing that more and more people will do, especially in these domains where there's been a lot of fishy results in the past. So here's our registered report we put on Open Science, and so everybody can see it. Typos and all, you can see there's a typo, but this is this is like a unchangeable now. And actually, I'm very near to my presentation because the only thing that we've done actually is a pilot study. To kind of, it's common when you do a registered report, not just to theorize, but also to say, well, here's another reason we think that this makes sense, because we've conducted a small pilot study. So we conducted 3 small pilot studies in Germany, Italy, and the United States. And let me walk you through this graphic. On the x-axis is how important do you think it is to do for small and medium businesses to do something around climate action? Okay, so that's the first order beliefs. And you'll see that quite a few people are kind of on the higher end of the scale here, 10, 7.5 to 10, kind of, right? There's a lot of businesses that think this is important. Now, the y-axis, the vertical axis, is how much weight or how important do you think other business owners put on it? And you can see there that there's not as many on the upper axis, right? And so that's the belief trap. The belief trap, basically, if there's much more points, if there's many more points below the diagonal than above the diagonal, you're seeing a belief trap in action, right? I think it's important, but I believe that other people don't think it's important, but in the same graphic, you see that actually other people do think it's important, and you see that there's a misconception. If there was no belief trap, basically pretty much everything should be on the diagonal, right? You think other people are like you. And here we kind of see first evidence that the belief trap does exist. And this has been kind of studied in a few other small studies, never with small business owners, and only a few of them on issues of climate. So in and of itself, this pilot is already suggestive that our first hypothesis, which you see kind of on the left there, that's kind of our first hypothesis in the registered report, is that SME owners have inaccurate beliefs of how much their peers value climate action. Again, smaller samples, surveys, you see different countries here, then we might discover that there are differences in different countries, but that, the pilot tends to suggest that this is a thing. And then our second finding, this is maybe what differs from the first study that I described, is, well, if you have a belief trap, are you more or less likely to take climate action? And our assumption is that if you believe that you care about it, but you believe that other people don't care about it, then you will not take climate action, right? Because, oh, it's just me, nobody else cares, I'm not a sucker, I'm not going to spend my time and precious resources on this type of thing. If it's just a drop in the ocean, nobody else that I can see around me is doing anything else, therefore I'm not inclined to act. But if you believe that it's important, and you believe that other people believe that it's important, we assume, or we hypothesize that you will take climate action yourself. So if there's a greater sense of accuracy, if the belief trap is smaller, then the likelihood that you will take climate action yourself is going to be higher. So in the survey that we designed, we're asking people about their beliefs. We're asking them about their beliefs about other people's beliefs. And then the final thing that we're asking them is, what are you actually doing around climate in your business? And we give them a list of things that they might be doing in terms of where they purchase their energy, in terms of their efficiency, in terms of all kinds of activities that they might be taking. And we're going to add those all up and then give that create a certain measure out of that. And if that measure is higher for those with smaller climate belief traps, then that would prove our hypothesis. And then kind of the takeaway would be, hopefully, we think, that if we are able to convince business owners to speak more openly about this, to provide accurate info, to be more transparent, that they actually believe these things and that they are maybe starting to do something about it, then it will create these social norms gradually over time to encourage more and more business owners to pursue this path, right? So therefore, to minimize the belief trap will increase the likelihood that similar small businesses would be motivated to act on climate change. Like I said, the paper just got conditionally accepted. We are 14 people from 8 different countries. So we're going to do this on 8 different geographies. We don't have Australians here now that I think about it. But we have Americans and Canadians, and then we have across the Atlantic, we have Ireland and France and Italy and Austria and Germany and the UK. So there's 8 countries and 8 countries, and the sample should be quite a few thousand people. We're doing this with third-party data collectors. I don't know if you know this company, YouGov. So they're doing all the data collection for us. We pay them. And for me, it's a kind of a new approach, both in terms of, like I said, I'm very excited about doing a registered report, but also I think I like it from the theory perspective, but I also like it from the practical. I think that it might have some practical use. And I think just to sum up, to say, we kind of, I've been saying this to a lot of natural scientists that I talk to, that the science of climate change is settled. The information deficit is not big at all. What's missing is the social science to motivate humans to address the problem. And kind of the pathway that I see is that we just need to be much more open about it, more open about our beliefs, more open about our actions. And once that becomes a more normative thing to express and to enact, then that would, a little bit become a tipping point, perhaps, in one way or another. That's what I have for today.
Thank you, Dror. Can I encourage a round of virtual and real applause for everyone who feels so motivated? Wonderful journey through your work and your thinking on what is some really gnarly stuff that you've obviously got a really clear and interesting line on. Please add questions to the sidebar or raise your hand if you'd like to get one. Yes, I see here we've got one. Craig Burton, is there a difference between belief traps and my wrong expectation that others want me to think or do X? The latter could be basic group effects.
I think I'm going to ask Craig to phrase this in a way that would be easier for me to parse.
Yeah, feel free to speak, Craig.
Yeah, hi there. That was a great talk.
Hi.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I'm really just saying that belief traps look like a sort of a passive thing where I make an assessment of what other people believe. Whereas I'm wondering if that's different to me behaving a certain way because I think others want me to do that. So kind of more classic tension within a group, so you have the group belief in how people should behave. And I'm wondering if it's different to belief traps, if it's a different thing because it's sort of active pressure.
So the distinction would be, I'm trying to make sure I understand this correctly. The distinction would be whether I'm doing something actively versus I'm just kind of not doing something because I don't see that the group emphasizes that type of thing?
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm after.
I don't know. I've not thought about the passive versus active because it's like, so you're saying the default choice would kind of be basically to not engage in anything, to be very passive. And sometimes a group or a norm would be such that, the right thing to do would be to act in a certain way, to make a more deliberate choice. And there could be a difference between whether it's the kind of the appropriate choice is a passive versus an active one.
Yeah, I don't have any answers. I'm just wondering about some companies.
Yeah, no, I thought about it.
Some
I don't have
SMEs
a
are
good
in
answer.
some SMEs are in little groups too, like the little art group type thing. Anyway, let someone else ask some questions. Thanks again.
Yeah, no, but I'm gonna make a note of that. That's a good question. But I do agree also that even within SMEs, the referent group is, and there's something I also studied that I didn't talk about today is, who is your referent group? Is it people in your neighbor, like the typical SME? Would it be like the store nearby or across the street? Or would it be, let's say, for example, if you're in the plumbing business, would be the plumbers that might be a little bit farther away, but they're kind of in the same profession. And we're very curious at understanding which of the most salient referent groups for SMEs, and we don't have an answer on that yet either. So that's a very good point.
Yeah, and Jenny is helpfully suggesting that might be the difference between injunctive and descriptive norms, where what people expect of me versus what I think is normal out there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's inside psych stuff. Do people know the distinction between injunctive and descriptive norms?
It's a gnarly one too, isn't it? Yeah.
So descriptive, very quickly, descriptive norms is like, what do I see? What is happening in the world? So for example, this is the example that I always use. A descriptive norm is a lot of people fly. And an injunctive norm would be, I think it's increasing in academia, that flying is bad, right? So the injunctive is like, well, you shouldn't fly or you should fly. That's kind of like, it has some kind of valence to it in terms of what is the right thing to do. Injunction is kind of implies some kind of value system, and descriptive norms are like, well, this is a thing that is done, and ergo maybe that's okay to do it. So that's for me the distinction between descriptive and injunctive norm.
That's useful. I see Rob's got a question now.
Yes, thanks, Dror. Really interesting presentation, and picked up on several things that I'm going to remember. So I was thinking about maybe zooming out a little bit, and I fully get your arguments around social norm change and how that happens. But if you zoom out, I think social norm change is just one of the aspects in broader social technical systems change. And you had at the beginning this list of policy change, economic change, technological change. You mentioned cultural change, and in the end, all of these are important changes as well. If you are to get to climate change, if you just think about the current situation in the US, for instance, yes, we can talk more about each other, but that's not going to make much difference given the current political climate. So there's other elements that need to change as well. And that got me to think about whether, and this is, I'm not a behavioral scientist, but from what I know about it, it's that often the recommendations are sort of point towards particular interventions, which is useful. But then should we place these interventions more in a better understanding of longer term processes? So I know there's stuff being done around sort of event history analysis, for instance, or process theories, which say that the explanation of change is not so much in particular causal relationships, but in the process, so in the order of events. So my question is whether we should do more about understanding when is social norm change the thing to focus on, and when should we focus on technological change or policy change or economic change? Any reflections on that?
Yeah, two things. So my standard templated answer to that is yes, we should do all of these things rather than I'm not of the economic mindset that that there's an opportunity cost necessarily, or like you have to make choices because you can't do all of these things. I think you can do all of these things to some extent, or at least those people who want to create political change and change the regime and influence policy. Absolutely, I have nothing against that. But in my domain, and I think to some audiences, the stuff that I propose could be useful, and it wouldn't be wrong to focus on that as well. So, the expression that I always go back to that I really liked is, and this is how old I am. This is Al Gore used to say, we're looking for a silver bullet, but we need to look for a silver buckshot. I don't know if people know what buckshot is. A shotgun, right? It's like it's a tiny, lots of small pellets going in very different directions. And there's not one silver bullet, but there's a lot of like little arrows and directions that we can go to, and you don't really know what's going to succeed most, and they're probably all good if you're trying to kind of hit a target. So I'm kind of that really appealed to me, that kind of metaphor. I do want to say something else that kind of you alluded to in terms of like behavioral change. And an assumption is that people will have a certain belief and then they'll act based on that belief. But I think sometimes it actually happens the opposite. So you might, experiment with something. You might just, get your hands on an electric car because your neighbor gave it to you to use it, and you start using it because it's available and your car is in the shop, and then eventually like, turns out that I actually like an electric car. And then you might get one, and then you might have an electric car for a while, and then eventually realize, I'm a person who has an electric car. Maybe I'm an environmentalist. And so sometimes I've discovered that people, the causality is actually different, right? You start to do something, then you realize that maybe it's intriguing, maybe it's opening certain avenues, maybe it's more social. For all kinds of reasons, you're doing this thing, and then you suddenly re-examine yourself, which we do occasionally, and you're like, oh, I'm this person. And so I think sometimes the pathway to getting people involved in climate issues is not necessarily like, oh, first I'm going to change your ideology, and then once I change your ideology, your behavior will follow. But sometimes it's like, oh, let's do this behavior, and then let's see what happens to your ideology over time. So I always kind of try to think about causality in different ways, and I'm often surprised by how kind of unintuitive people are in regards of like what goes first, what really changes the way that people think about an issue.
Yeah, thanks, Dror. That resonates a lot with some earlier findings on actual electric vehicle research in the context of sustainability transitions, where, and this goes back to the early 90s, where people experimented with providing electric vehicles at the time for much longer durations to people to try them out in their daily practice for 3 to 6 months, and that actually had much more impact. And people started actually changing their views on electric vehicles rather than just walking into a showroom and touching and viewing one and getting some information on it. So it also takes time before you start to change your fundamental beliefs, I guess, through practice.
Yeah, so that's the complex contagion. You need multiple touch points, definitely. But also, I would be curious, I don't know if anybody studied, if those people who started to buy EVs, if over time they actually became increasingly environmentalists in other aspects of their lives. I think that would also be an interesting thing to study. Jennifer's going to put a lot of knowledge of psychology into this talk right now. I can see this.
Go, Jenny.
Well, my question actually, Dror, just relates exactly to what you were saying, but I want to start again by saying, like, thank you for coming and doing this presentation. Not only is the research fascinating, but also the way that you've presented the journey is really nice to kind of see the evolution of these ideas, because often, like at Behavior Works, we will do that. We will talk about things, and then other things will come over, and over time, you kind of come to these points. But my one of my recent studies in my PhD was actually a methodological one, and it was actually about this. Part of it was about the idea of causal evidence and kind of looking at how many people equate correlation to causation and don't explore things like reverse causality. And I'm just really glad you mentioned it, because one of my questions was, you put up the graph about the belief trap in SMEs, and then the kind of the hypothesis that if we could correct people's misunderstandings of other people's beliefs, would that lead them to take climate action? So I was really interested if actually, once you're obviously still got to do the main study and publish the main study and hopefully find the same finding, but do you then have plans or even possibilities of taking it to the next step and trying to get the experimental evidence to say that the direction of the relationship is better beliefs, more accurate beliefs leads to climate action, as opposed to when I take climate action, I then learn more about how many other people are interested, and that gives me a better picture of people's beliefs. So I was wondering if you've got the plans to keep going on this journey to continue to amass the evidence.
Yeah, in Australia, as Stefan said, it's like the next phase is going to be in Australia with you and him and anybody else on this call. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, but I think I would be curious if you have like methodological views in terms of how you would able to isolate a lot of things in that type of, because I think you want to watch a cohort and have another cohort that kind of has a different perspective, a different kind of intervention, and to try to reduce any kind of other influences in terms of making that. It just seems empirically a very difficult. You'd almost want people in a bubble to do that. Or am I missing? Is it doable, do you think?
No, I don't want to get too technical, because I know there's a range of different people on the call for many different reasons. But part of what I was doing was exploring the different ways that people try to confirm the counterfactual, and that there are very positivist RCT experiment types, but there are also other ways, more interpretivist ways that are still trying to build the same evidence to suggest that, it is a causal relationship in one direction and not in other direction. So yes, I would love to continue the conversation.
Please send me an email with that work. No, that would be fascinating. If you could just send me.
Yeah, I was going to ask Dror this question, but it sounds like I need to talk to you, Jenny. Like one thing that's happening in the broader behavioral public policy community, I guess, is a recognition that RCTs really aren't that good for complex causality and these multifactorial issues. So my question to you, Dror, was going to be, what are you noticing about the limitations of the RCT design, and are you exploring other methods? But it sounds like Jenny's also someone I need to talk to about that from your review. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's definitely become a kind of a hegemonic thing, which always annoys me. If like everybody's starting to do things in a certain way, and kind of, I've noticed that really you talk to certain disciplines these days, and if it's not an RCT, they kind of want to hang up on you. So that's always like a warning light for me. In terms of other approaches, other research designs, that's exactly what I would be interested in learning more myself. So I don't really have like kind of a second best or like a complementary understanding of what types of experimental designs. Because I think the really appealing thing about the RCT is that you could do this registered report. That's, I think, kind of to me, that's like a really good part of it. But to the extent that you can do registered reports about other research designs, then I think that those would be very interesting to explore as well. But I'm not an expert. I mean, I'm not even a social psychologist originally, but I'm kind of learning a lot as I go along. So we just are breathing out after finally getting this accepted about 2 weeks ago, and we don't really have a very specific game plan for the next thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dror. Well, I might take another chair's question unless anyone else is wanting to ask one. I found myself thinking a lot about your work in the context of some in-depth research I've done with Australian farmers about their interest in adopting sustainable land management practices in response to incentives, and it definitely concluded that the incentives wasn't the main story here, and there was things like, what's my neighbours doing? Does it help me realize the business goals and values I have? Does it help me leave the land in a better condition, and so on? And I guess it made me think too that particularly here in Australia, we have this rural city divide with politics, where there's an interesting article I read recently where they were suggesting that some Australian farmers at least are quite environmental, but they're politically conservative, and so that they might feel like their political values are not necessarily being met by here it's Liberal Nationals who promote anti-climate or anti-nature policies, but nevertheless they feel aligned with their interests. So I guess I'm sort of curious about your thoughts about the alignment between political identification and the belief traps for businesses, because I guess in small business as well, there is this bit of a narrative that conservatives are the party for small business or the like, whereas those Democrats
right. No, that's a great question, and we have actually thought about that. One of the reasons that back when we began this project with the National Film Board, that we decided to focus on small businesses, because that has a lot of appeal across the political spectrum. I mean, if there's a group like a social group in the world today that not too many people have a beef about, it's small businesses. If you think about it, nobody likes the government anymore, nobody likes big business, nobody likes left right divide on many things. But if you think about small business, like the left people are like, they love it, it's very artisanal, it's very authentic. The right wing people like it because it's very entrepreneurial, it's very bootstrapping. So it's like nobody hates small businesses, and it's not a political landmine. And that was one of the things that we thought about. And it really is true. There's groups in the world that could kind of go towards the same types of goals, maybe from different ideological perspectives, but achieve the main things in reality. And you don't have to turn it into a political fight. And to me, those types of audiences are very appealing to work with. So you mentioned farmers. And I think a lot of rural communities, even more broadly, you could think about people who hunt, right? A lot of people who really care about the natural environment are actually hunters. They like to go out, they like to do what they do. And for that, they have to actually have vibrant ecosystems in order to supply the game that they hunt. Hunters, fishers. And so I think we sometimes maybe exaggerate what we think are ideological divides in terms of their implications for sustainability behavior. And I think especially in those communities, there's quite a lot of bridging that's possible, but you have to just navigate it carefully and not come from a place of political posturing, but really like, well, what do we want? What are the things that we want in terms of the communities that we live in? And I think you'll find much more consensus than you think is really there.
And so these shared platforms in your robust action framework, if people want to read more about that, there's some interesting analysis that Dror's done on this in broader sustainability as well. Well, I see we're at time. I don't think anyone wants to go, but we should let you go, Dror. It's getting late, isn't it? I can see it's dark.
It is. You may be seeing dust outside my window. Here it's 7:30 p.m. But it's been a pleasure to be with you. I really appreciated the invitation. I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to meet all of you in person when I was there a few months ago, but hopefully next time.
Yeah, great. Well, hopefully this is the continuation of the conversation that we already started back in November, and hopefully others will join us now as well. So thank you, Dror. I'd like to applaud you again. Very clear, lucid, fascinating discussion, wonderful questions it's generated, and who knows where we go from here. So thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Dror.
Bye-bye.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.